Good afternoon and welcome to the library. I'm Dwayne Cox, Head of Special Collections and Archives, and I thank you all for being here. Our speaker this afternoon is Dr. John Hall. John, he has a long resume here and I won't read it all. I checked with him before to make sure what he wanted me to say, and he said, just don't say that he started any of the fires. But John is a naturalist. He's a museum professional. He is currently the curator of the Museum of the Black Belt at
Livingston.
At University of West Alabama, which is located in Livingston. And he's here today, as you know, to discuss William Bartram, but his trip and his appearance is funded by the W. Kelly Mosley Foundation, which was created in honor of Ralph Brown Draughon Sr., who was president of Auburn University from 1947 until 1964, and was himself a historian. The Kelly Mosley Foundation funds are administered by the Center for the Caroline Marshall Draughon Center for the Arts and Humanities, known sometimes as Pebble Hill. And they're one of the co-sponsors today, along with the university libraries. After Dr. Hall's presentation, there are refreshments in the room behind the reference desk, and if you don't know him already, I'm sure he would be glad to get to know you as time allows. Dr. Hall.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today. I've got 3 degrees from the University of Alabama, and this is the only place that'll pay me to talk about Bartram. It kind of feels like I've discovered a new sin. You're going to find that I'm very excited about this whole thing, and really the subtitle of this talk is who is William Bartram and why should we care? And so I'm going to kind of range hither and yon, but someone reminded me to be sure and tell my joke, which is my best Auburn joke. But it's a good Auburn joke, in a good way, as they say. During the Depression, one of the alphabet agencies hired the professor from Auburn to go out and give the talk on agriculture around the state. Went to every county, every little town, gave the same talk over and over and over. They provided him with a car and a driver, and they went on and on and on and on. And after a couple of weeks, the driver says, you know, boss, I think I could give that talk myself. The professor says, well, I'm getting pretty tired of it. Let's change hats. And so they swapped hats. The professor drove into town, and the driver gets out, stands up in front of the crowd, and gives the talk perfectly. Just perfectly. And he's doing real well in the question and answer until finally some wise guy in the back stands up and asks some horrible question involving phases of the moon and planting by signs and pounds of fertilizer and things like that. And what do you think about that? That's the dumbest question I ever heard. That question is so dumb, even my chauffeur can answer it. So I have my chauffeur here. This is wife Rosa, who's almost ready to give the talk. If it went a few more of these long, she could do it. There's really 2 Bartrams to talk about. And there is the one who's famous up north, which is John Bartram, this man's father. And then there's the one who visited the South and wrote the book about Alabama and the Southeast, which is who we know to be famous. So this is going to kind of range, but amongst them. Here's the old man who you'll notice was painted by Charles Willson Peale in 1808, and I counted on my fingers and I realized that the old man is about my age in that picture. He is the author of the Travels and an account about Indians. He is the son of John Bartram, who is the famous man in Philadelphia. He's an artist of note, and he's the senior American naturalist of his day. And one of the little things I'd like to point out about him today is how he fits into the society of the Founding Fathers. He's very much a part of that group. And so it'll be interesting to kind of watch how he fits into that. This is the father. We really don't have a portrait of John. He's the first American-born professional botanist, maybe the first professional botanist in America. He has an international reputation. He is in direct contact with Linnaeus, who is the kind of the father of botany. He originates a commercial nursery, which he calls a botanical garden. And this nursery supports the family for several generations. It's a going concern. In 1765, he is appointed the King's Botanist by the King of America. I always enjoy asking children if they know America had a king, and we certainly did. And he is being supported by a Quaker British businessman named Peter Collinson. And he sends Collinson these boxes of seeds and plant and cuttings and things. And Collinson, who is in the midst of this big enthusiasm for English gardening, hands these things out to people. And in fact, probably John Bartram's responsible for more of the introduced weeds in Europe than anybody else. And he is the co-founder of the American Philosophical Society in 1742, which is the first American scientific society. So he's quite a guy. This is the family friend. And one of the things to point out is that this is another Peale portrait, and you'll see these all through the show today. This man was a habitual painter of famous Americans in his day. And so to see the Bartram portrait amongst them is to kind of indicate where he ranks in all of this. He also has international reputation of a scientist. If he had not gone into politics, he would be famous still as a scientist. He is the co-founder with John Bartram, the American Philosophical Society, and he has offered a printing job to the son William. William is the second son. He's one of a pair of twins, and there's an older son who is going to inherit the family business. And so the father is very anxious to find something for Billy to do. And one of the things that he does not accept is a job as an apprentice with Franklin, and he fails at about everything else he tries, and so we'll see what happens to poor Billy. This is the Bartram House from a engraving published about the time of Bartram William's death. And I'm sorry to be blocking the way here. I'm quite opaque. All right. And so there it is, about 1820 or so, and there it is today. The house is still in good repair. It is a city park in Philadelphia, located about 3 or 4 miles out from town on the other side of the Schuylkill River. It is a project of a large friends group, and it's very active, and they've redone the house. The place looks beautiful. That looks like a raggedy old garden here, but in fact, that is probably what it looked like in Bartram's day. Some of the famous Americans like Madison and Jefferson and George Washington himself come out to see the famous garden and are disimpressed. It lacks order. All right. And of course, the Bartrams are planting by habitat, and they're planting wet plants here and dry plants here and sunny plants here and all. And they're still doing this. And so it's really quite a nice affair. The Bartrams are part of a large Quaker community in and around Philadelphia, and this Quaker community really is quite connected still to England and to Holland. And so again and again, we're going to see this connection of businessmen and whatnot. What looks at first like a kind of a cutesy little religious motto under the window, which is carved, by the way, by John himself. It is God alone, Almighty Lord, the Holy One, by me adored, John Bartram, 1770. Well, that looks just, oh, isn't that sweet? But in fact, he's a free thinker, and he is at odds with his meeting, his church, over the question of the Trinity. He denies it. He says there's only one. And now if you read it, of course, again, "'Tis God alone," you realize that this is a religious screed. He is stating his belief. At one point, they formally dischurch him. And he says, that's okay. And he comes to church every day anyway. He keeps on coming. Here's Bartram's desk, reconstructed as it might have been sometime in the early 1820s, around the time of Bartram's death. The furniture is gone from the house, but they have replenished it with period antiques. It's very lovely. The lady who was running the tour would not go on until I came out of the room. I was going to sit at the desk for a while. And so it's a shame. I really wanted to sit there for a little while, but there is his desk in the house. This is a going commercial concern. Here's the garden catalog published by the father, John Bartram, 1758. There's a number of these known. He is prepared to supply you with seeds and cuttings and bulbs and whatnot for several hundred species of plants, many of which are from the south or from further west. In fact, if you look right there, that is John Bartram's signature on that particular piece right there. So this is very much of a business venture as far as John is concerned. This is John's sponsor in England, a man named Peter Collinson, who is a Quaker businessman. There is a connection between him and Franklin, who you will recall is in England for some time before the Revolutionary War. And this man is a famous supporter of science and botanists. And there is a genus of plants, in fact, named Collinsonia, by someone who knew which side of the bread his butter was on. And so this is Peter Collinson. They never met. There's a lengthy correspondence between them. Bartram Sr. is sending them these boxes of seeds and whatnot. And this guy really is quite important to the foundation of early botany as a science. Here's the problem. Billy doesn't want to be the printer's devil to Benjamin Franklin. Billy wants to be a botanist and an artist. And as early as 14 or 15, Billy's art is already circulating in Europe. This is one of a number of little pictures here showing a bird or something sitting on some sort of a little stump, which has been unkindly referred to as the stump and magpie period. But the thing of it is all of the things you will see in the Bartram drawings are real plants and animals. That's an identifiable plant. It's probably, it's either peppergrass or trumpet creeper. This is an identifiable species of moth. This is another grassy plant over here. And again in these little drawings, you're going to see identifiable natural history specimens. Bartram has some kind of a phobia about having empty spots in his drawings. And you're going to see that he's always kind of putting something off in a corner to kind of fill up an empty spot or something. So this is just sort of typical Bartram. He gets more elegant, but he can't help himself for filling in the empty spots. Also early on, he's commissioned to draw a series of turtles for someone in England. And he draws a lovely series of turtles, which are very much acceptable illustrations of recognizable species. Here's a mud turtle with the identifiable little hinge in it. There's a Blandings turtle. Now that's a northeast species. We don't have that one in the south. But look at the, oops, excuse me. Look at the pretty shine he's been able to render on the belly of the turtle there. And then while that's kind of cartoonish, any of you who have had the enjoyment of dealing with a free-range snapping turtle knows, man, they'll get back up on their hind legs and they'll get down and they'll leap and lunge and snap at you and they go pop at you. So that's not a happy snapping turtle right there. But this is, you know, the kid's got talent, but can he make a living at it? Here's a young Bartram as a timber rattlesnake, lacking a little bit in artistic merit, but certainly an accurate little watercolor painting of a timber rattlesnake. English win the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War in Europe. The French give up their claim to the southeast, which is typified by the presence of Fort Toulouse right over here. And so through Collinson's influence, John is appointed king's botanist to go down and explore the southwest. This is the southwest in this era. It doesn't become southeast until much later. All right, and that's the best map I have from National Geographic, and since it was free. So they come out of Philadelphia, they come down to Charleston, they explore the coast up and down the South Carolina, Georgia, North Florida coast, spend a good deal of time down around St. Augustine and the St. Johns River area down here. Little Billy says, this is it, man, this is the place, this is what I want to do. And so this is in 1765. They write a big report and send it off to Collinson, and then they go home. One of the things they discover in the South is the Franklin tree. Now this is the famous instance of the camellia-like shrub they find growing at Fort Barrington, Georgia. They find it in one place. There's a small grove of mature big shrubs. By 1810, it's gone. No one ever sees it again. People have looked for it in the woods ever since, and it's not there. And so between this trip in which it is not blooming and the next trip in which it is, they get some seeds. He and his father on 2 different trips collect seeds from this thing, and the seeds go back to Philadelphia. This becomes extinct in the wild, and the assumption at this point, there's still some work on it, but there's assumption at this point is that all living specimens of this are descended from the seeds that the Bartrams rescued. So it's, that may or may not be true, but that's the story. It is an extraordinarily hard plant to grow. It will not grow in any place that has ever grown cotton, which in this day and age means most of the South, because there's a fungus associated with cotton agriculture which kills it. And it's very rare to see one of these things grown large enough to be flowering and fruiting. So I've tried it twice now, and neither one of them has lived but about a year. So I'm going to try it again. But this is Franklin's Camellia, Franklinia Altamaha. The Altamaha is the upper end of the Savannah River. So it's Franklin's Camellia of the Altamaha. Billy fails at storekeeping. He fails at being a planter. His father gives him a bunch of money and sets him up with some land to become an indigo farmer. He's more interested in natural history than he is in disciplining his slaves. He can't get anything done. He goes broke. And in fact, he's pretty much of a failure. Now, we like to call him Billy and think of him as a young kid there, but he's in his mid-30s when all this is going on. And so he scurries around and finds himself a sponsor in England who is an associate of Collinson's. And this man is John Fothergill, who is the Dr. Phil of London of his day. He's the society doctor, and he also has a big botanical garden and supports botanists. Fothergill commissions him to go to the southeast, collect exotic plants, common plants that we know were considered to be exotic, and send them to him, and kind of sort of micromanages him or tries to micromanage him. And Billy, he keeps saying, Billy, get more plants, more plants, more plants. And Billy says, yeah, right, look at the Indians. look at this, look at that. And so there's sort of a little tension between them as to whether he's doing exactly what he should be doing. And so Billy writes several reports to him which exist, and one which doesn't, we wish it did, which go back to England. The problem here is that all of the drawings and the manuscripts and the specimens that he collects go to Britain. Then after the unpleasantness beginning shortly, they never come back. Fothergill is handing them out hither and yon as sort of marks of favor and influence. And to this day, there has never been a retrospective of the Bartram art. There's never been a big collection of it in a book. The specimens are scattered hither and yon around the country, and so there's still work to do. The problem being is that the stuff is over there and the people who are interested are over here. But as we know, there are people who are working on this, and so we remain hopeful. Here's a drawing for Mr. Fothergill. Rosa gets upset with me when I call this a cartoon. I don't mean that that doesn't mean it's supposed to be funny. But again, all of the little elements in here are real. This is a identifiable species of land snail. These are calcite crystals here. This is a American lotus pod with seeds lying here and there. Probably a hummingbird, a male dragonfly, not just a generic dragonfly because of the little black spots on his wings. And then, of course, the snake eating the frog over here. The frog seems to be a little distressed. All right, and if you look right down here, there's the tail of the snake sticking out, and right back through there, just faintly to be seen, is the snake's body. So this is sort of typical Bartram. All of these are identifiable species. He doesn't distinguish amongst them. He says, boy, that's interesting too. Rosa and I have been laughing lately. In one of the catalogs at Christmas was a T-shirt that says something to the effect of, we should all buckle down and be serious about what we do and not be distracted by other things. Oh, look, there's chicken. It's an ADD T-shirt. That's what it is. AD. So, oh, look, there's a chicken. So Bartram is, I think, maybe a little bit distracted by things. So with his grant from Fothergill, he comes back to Charleston. He mostly lives in Savannah. If you read the book, you think he is on this big, long 3-year journey throughout the Southeast. He is living in Savannah and going on excursions, usually with letters of introduction to important people hither and yon. And he goes and he spends weeks or months collecting. Then he comes back to Savannah, boxes it up, writes it up, ships it off to Mr. Fothergill. So that's the way the thing's going. The book is very deliberately created to convey the sense of this journey without the complications of coming and going. And so it's not that he's being duplicitous, it's just that it's easier to write a travel log like that. He is, in the spring of 1775, he is trying to go over the Appalachians to see the Cherokees in central Tennessee. When the unpleasant news arrives of the beginning of the war in Boston. And the British agents have been stirring up the frontier. It's not safe to go over and see the over-the-hill Cherokees. And so he regroups very quickly, finds there is a bunch of traders who are going to Mobile. He joins them, and off he goes to Alabama. He and his father before him want to see the Mississippi. And so the whole point of this is to go to Mobile and then go along the coast and up to Point Coupé to see the Mississippi River, which he eventually accomplishes. And fortunately for us, though, he enters Alabama along the Chattahoochee River in early July of 1775 and spends the rest of the summer and part of the winter either in Alabama or traveling across it. He goes to Mobile, he takes a little side trip to Pensacola, where he is afraid that he's going to be arrested, even though the family appears to have been revolutionary in sympathy. He is carrying all these letters to important people who are, of course, loyalists. And so he doesn't know who would arrest him. It may be one or the other, you know, and everybody, you know, I mean, this whole war at this point is Shiite Sunni all over again. People are killing each other, burning each other out, shipping each other off, stealing from each other. It's a terrible scene. And so, unfortunately, he is recognized by the governor at Pensacola, and the governor, instead of arresting him, offers him a job. Won't you stay here and do a survey of West Florida and be our naturalist? No thanks, I'm going back to Mobile. And so that's what he does. He goes over, gets a look at the river in the vicinity of Baton Rouge, meets, not Rosalind, Dunbar, who's the famous Mississippi natural historian, comes back to Mobile, sends off a load, and this is what I would really love to see, is some of the specimens and the notes that he sent to England from Mobile about September of 1775. And then he comes back up the old road to Mobile, which is Federal Road to be, and spends the winter living in a little Indian town. If you go to Montgomery, if you go north like you go into Wetumpka, at some point you will cross the Tallapoosa River. The Indian town where he is staying is immediately upstream on the left bank. All right? So he's living there. He goes down to Fort Toulouse. He sees and describes Fort Toulouse. He describes Alabama. He describes the Black Belt. He describes 80 miles of unbroken hardwood forest in the midst of what we know to be the Pine Belt now. He describes an area 10 miles across that is solid dogwood trees. What? A old growth forest of dogwood trees? So there's all kinds of wonderful things that he sees here, and we're very thankful for him. Then he, about the 1st of January, he goes back to Savannah. He kind of gets his affairs in order. By then, the war is on. He loses touch with England, and then in 1776, he goes back home, not along the coast where the war is, but he goes back inland and goes home to Philadelphia and arrives there in time for his father's death the next year, and lives the rest of his life on the Botanical Garden, which now belongs to his brother, as kind of the resident naturalist and reinvented philosopher. He's still inspiring to modern workers. This is a modern artist named Jackson Walker, and this wonderful painting of Billy in his dugout canoe along the St. Johns River in Florida, his favorite area. I have not seen the original of this, but they tell me if you look back in the bushes, you can see Indians peeking out, which I think is a grand idea. And so there's Billy in the St. Johns. Here's a kind of a close-up of where he was in Alabama. He enters down below Phoenix City, Columbus, crosses the river at an big Indian town called Uchi. And he goes along the northern edge of the Black Belt, crosses the Black Belt down the old federal path, and he spends most of his time, up here around Stockton at the home of former British commander there, a man named Farmer, Major Farmer. And Farmer loans him a canoe and somebody to row, and he explores upstream into the delta up here and makes a number of his most important discoveries and beautiful things that he sees, and he describes very nicely for us. and then eventually he finds a boat that's going west, and he goes to see the Mississippi. Comes back up the path, and then spends the winter in here, and then back home to Savannah. Lovely big painting of Uchi. It's a poster created by the U.S. Army, which explains the great big eagle in the front. But this is a pretty good drawing, actually. The artist has done his homework. This is the Chattahoochee River. This is the West Bank in Alabama. Big winter house, big council house with a conical roof, kind of semi-subterranean, and then bunches of individual dwellings around. Here's people shooting with blowguns. Here's the Chunky Yard, which is one of the big games of kind of the early historic period. The Chunky Yard often had a big post sunk right in the middle of it, and there's the big post, and this post is very important symbolically for the town. And when you went to war, this is what you painted red and stuck your hatchet in and things like this. So he's got that right. This is a very big picture, and by the time you shoot it down like this, what you can't see very well is that over here are a bunch of mounted horsemen, and that is undoubtedly Bartram and his party of travelers about to cross the river. Here's the path to Mobile. The Indians had been here 15,000 years by this time, and they had all the routes here and there worked out. And the trick of getting from over on the in the creek area around the upper Tallapoosa and Coosa is that you don't want to have to cross all these big rivers as you head for Mobile. And so what you do is you come down the divide along the edge of the Alabama, and this old track, which was a footpath and later a horse path and finally a wagon road, becomes the federal road. So this is the path to Mobile. There are still places where you can see the old ruts of the wagon road. And I'm glad to report that here recently the Highway Department has announced that they are going to publish a map of the federal road, which was surveyed, a map that shows which parts of it there's still roadbed on. And in fact, a good deal, probably 40 to 50% of it still has modern improved roads on it. And then, of course, a good deal of it crosses private property. I'm not quite sure how they're going to deal with that because you can't get on that property. But a good deal of the stuff on private property still looks like this. This photograph, pardon? Looks like this is photographed by Mark Dauber, who's a local photographer. Maybe some of you know him. He's most excellent. One of the favors he does do for us is that he, just over the line in Georgia, just before he comes to Alabama, describes very carefully the oak leaf hydrangea, which is, of course, everybody in the South's favorite plant. You may be interested to realize that this is your new state wildflower. Now, it's not the state flower, which is what? The camellia, right. Why is the camellia the state flower? Because the legislature asked the Women's Federated Garden Clubs to offer a candidate, and they did. Why did they pick that? Nobody knows, but it's sure pretty. But unfortunately, it doesn't live in the Western Hemisphere. Anyway, this is a much better candidate for the state flower, but it's never going to be the state flower. It's always going to be the state wildflower. This is a drawing, an engraving made from a drawing by Bartram. And there is a leaf collected by Bartram in Alabama or Georgia the summer of 1775. And I would love to know if that, in fact, that might not be one of the leaves that went back from Mobile that summer. So this, by the way, this leaf was here. Remember, we had a Bartram conference in this room, in fact, a couple of years ago. And this was one of the ones that somebody had managed to get here to show us. But that's about as close as you're going to come to meeting William Bartram right now. Here's another one of his descriptions. Now, he names some 200 plants in the book, but for reasons technical, he winds up being able to credit only about 20 of them because of botanical complications, which we won't go in here. But this is one of the ones that he described. This is the big leaf magnolia, the one with the great big green leaves, blossoms about this big around. He calls it Magnolia auriculata because of the little ears back here at the base of the leaf. But this is better called in Alabama cowcumber, not to be confused with cucumber magnolia, which is a different plant. All right, so this is cowcumber, and I'll read you his description of this in just a moment. Pyramid magnolia, another one of his discoveries. This one, interestingly, is discovered from down around Boatyard Lake in Baldwin County. Boatyard Lake is where Fort Mims is. That's the place where the Creek War kicks off 30 years later. But this has got this peculiar little kite-shaped or diamond-shaped leaf. It's also got ears, but it's much smaller, and blossoms are about this big. This is here. If you look for it hard in the woods, you can find it, but it's not one of the more prominent of the deciduous magnolias. Now, this is him describing Magnolia auriculata. Nancy, and all you other botanists here, this is how it ought to be done. How gaily flutter the radiated wings of the Magnolia auriculata, each branch supporting an expanded umbrella, superbly crested with a silver plume, fragrant blossom or crimson-studded strobila and fruits. Oh, that's much better than the modern way, isn't it? And he goes on and on about several trees. I'm going to read you something else longer in a minute, so I won't read this one. But he goes on and on about the stateliness of the trunk of the cypress, cumbrous top toward the skies, wide shade, dark intervening cloud, and so forth. I mean, this is somebody who really likes it. Again, inspiring people. This is an Alabama artist, Carol Meredith Barksdale. And this is supposed to be Tuckabatchee. We don't have any indication that Bartram actually ever did any landscapes. But she did her homework. This is the Tallapoosa flowing this direction. If you are driving toward Tallahassee from Shorter, you cross the river, and shortly you will see some kind of industrial plant out in the field, and what looks like part of Auburn's experiment station or something back behind it. Behind that, by the river, is this. That's where this is. Okay? And again, she's got the big winter house down right. She has got the little clusters of private homes surrounded by little fences, which is a feature that Bartram alone notes amongst all of the people who talk about the creeks, are the little fences around the little clusters of 2 or 3 houses. And then here again, there's the chunky yard, there's the pole, and here is the square ground. Thank you. My chauffeur can answer that question. The square ground. The square ground was very formatted. Who could sit where, what clan, and so forth. And this is the outdoor venue for everybody making decisions and whatnot. So he's still inspiring folks. Hi. Oh, she always gets on me for not doing this, and I need to do it. Mr. Bartram alone notes that the houses, which were poles with woven branches and canes between them and then plastered smoothly with mud, at the bigger towns were painted and had mythological animals painted on them. Nobody else talks about this. And Bartram is full of these insights. It's nice. I would love to see one of these houses that was in full dress before things started to go bad for the Creek Nation.
Lower Creek or Upper Creek, Tuckabatchee?
Tuckabatchee is, I guess, Upper Creek, and is the us and the British and everybody else tried to put Western organizational models onto the creeks. and it doesn't quite fit. And this is kind of maybe sometimes sort of the creek capital or where big meetings were held. This is the town, for instance, where Tecumseh comes down and gives the frightening speech suggesting that we kill all the white guys. Not a bad idea. All right. One of the things he discovers in Baldwin County is the giant evening primrose, which he's very careful about describing, does it all just perfectly. It's big, tall, yellow primrose, sometimes with blossoms as big as 4 or 5 inches. And even discounting a certain amount of hyperbole from the learned master, it's still down there, and it's still pretty, although it's not quite that big. There's a photograph of it. It is quite widespread. This is one of the flowers that goes back to England and Holland and escapes. And it spreads rapidly and is a roadside weed. Well, around 1903 or 4, when De Vries and Schermach and the other guy are working on reinventing the laws of of heredity, and De Vries starts working on mutation, it is this plant, it turns out, that De Vries is using as a model for his mutation studies. And unfortunately, it mutates very rapidly and interbreeds, and it's really very difficult. But new evidence suggests that that is, in fact, the Bartram primrose that is so important to the foundation of genetics. Now, this is obviously a big flooded swamp back over here. Bartram goes up the river at Stockton, up through the delta, bears left and goes up the Tombigbee a short distance. And one of these places, now this is the senior southern botanist of his era. Nobody else knows the Southeast better. He's been down there about 3 or 4 years by this time. He knows it. He's seen it all right? And here's what he says about Alabama. Opposite this bluff on the other side of the river is a district of swamp or lowland, the richest I ever saw, or perhaps anywhere to be seen. As for the trees, I shall forbear to describe them because it would appear incredible. Let it suffice to mention that the cypress, ash, sycamore, yellow poplar, sweet gum, and others are by far the tallest, straightest, and in every way the most enormous that I have ever seen or heard of. That's Alabama. And if we can leave that delta along long enough, maybe we'll see those big trees again. So we don't have anything to be ashamed of. He was impressed with Alabama, and he had seen the rest of the South. So he is the discoverer of the Cahaba Lily, which many of you realize is actually the Shoals lily and occurs in many of the rivers as they come down off of the fall line into the coastal plain all the way around the southeast up into the Carolinas. Our local variety is the Cahaba Lily, and we're rightfully proud of this gorgeous river plant. All right, here's the book. Rosa tells me this is a bum slide. I apologize. All right. The book is the green one. Thank you. This is the most commonly found edition of the book by Dover. Do not buy this book. Okay, I'll explain in a minute. All right. But this is about the same size as the original, maybe slightly thicker and all. At the time this was printed, in 1791, it was the largest book ever printed in America. So this was by no minor feat that he managed to pull off. And part of the problem for having to wait so long, so the war is over about 83, and it's still, 8 years here until the book is published. And so part of this delay is due to the sheer size of the project. And this delay, unfortunately, during this delay, there are 4 other major botanical works about America printed, and he gets scooped in naming many of his plants. Hi.
Could I add at this point, I should have said this earlier, Auburn owns
Oh, let's go look at it by all means. Yeah. These are extraordinarily rare now because it was not popular. It didn't sell. And in fact, that's the only American edition until 1928. One edition. But the next year, there's an edition published in Britain, and there's, over the years, have been something like 50 foreign editions. And of course, Bartram doesn't get a penny out of any of these. Although it does appear that he got a chance to partially edit the one that was published in London. And I'll show you something from them in a minute. It turns out that the book is avidly read by Britain and the Europeans, who see it as a romantic novel of man in the wilderness, surrounded by tall trees and dangerous panthers and Indians lurking with bows and arrows and things like that. The romantic side of the Indians increases in direct proportion to how far away from them you are. New England, by the late 1700s or 1800s, has this romanticized notion of Indians as soon as the Indians stop scalping them. And so it's a bloody business. And so in Europe, though, they've always thought that the Indians are very cool. And so this was an important book for them. It's never been out of print in 216 years, which is a pretty good record. Here's the flyleaf to the book. This is Bartram's friend Miko Chuluko, and that's probably the only portrait that we know of that Bartram drew. This is an engraving made by a Philadelphia engraver of the portrait. The book actually is entitled Travels Through North and South Carolina, East and West Georgia, the Cherokee Country, the extensive territories of the Muskogulges or the Confederacy, Creek Confederacy. And it goes on and on, which is why everyone calls it Bartram's Travels. All right. There's actually two documents in this book. The first is this travel log, which is primarily natural history and an account of his trip. The second part is an account relating to the Indians, which is his answers at length to a series of questions posed to him by a professor at the emerging University of Pennsylvania. And it is in that part that he really expands on his observations of the Indians. And it turns out to be extraordinarily valuable piece of anthropology. And in fact, Catherine Braun here published recently on this, and everybody is delighted with the things that Bartram saw. Here's the front piece to the travels, and then here is the lead page to the account, which is kind of the second part of the book. Okay, this is just for fun now. All right, this is Bartram's original sketch. And it's really, this guy's either pretty skinny or he's not very pretty or whatever. There's Miko Chuluko, means Chief Chuluko. All right, here is the engraving as it appears in the Philadelphia produced book. Maybe a little bit of improvement. Okay, and then this is 1791, and then here's the next spring edition printed in London. Right here. Now, this is before photographic reproduction. And so if you've got a drawing, you have to re-engrave it or get the block. And since the block was in America, you had to re-engrave it. So they gave it to a much more talented engraver in London. But unfortunately, Chief Chuluko turns out looking like King George. And so here's King George. He's looking really pretty good there. All right. And then here at the meeting a couple years ago, someone had a French edition of the book, which is even later. And here's the French edition. And what someone has done is they've taken a piece of tissue paper, they've traced the British edition, then they've laid the piece of tissue paper down on the new plate and engraved through the tissue paper onto the new plate, which of course when you print it means that the image is reversed. But now he's looking like Rousseau. He's looking even better at this point an even more skilled engraver right there. So there's the gradual improvement of Chief Chuluco going through the editions. If they had kept doing it this way, he'd look pretty handsome, Robert Redfordish now, probably. Now, Bartram's favorite place is north central Florida, and he writes about it glowingly. And one of his favorite things are the big blue springs that come up out of the ground and then go flowing away here. And so he says, just under my feet was the enchanting and amazing crystal fountain, which incessantly threw up from dark rocky caverns below, tons of water every minute forming a basin, and a creek of 4 or 5 feet depth of water and near 20 yards over, which meanders 6 miles through green meadows, a continual and amazing ebullition. Now, we know that Coleridge is reading Bartram because he's copied part of it into his workbook. And so after this passes through the opium-soaked brain of Mr. Coleridge, it comes out, in Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alf the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. And he goes on and talks about 6 miles over, which is a Bartram phrase, and so forth and so on. And you read Kubla Khan, you read Bartram's description, you say, oh my word, there's no doubt about where this guy is getting his mood, and so forth. So the poets, the Romantic poets, reading minutely. And then here's Ruth. Ruth is fun. Go to the internet, Google Wordsworth Ruth text, and this will come up, and read the whole poem. It's 250 lines long. It's fun. The upshot of which is a wild Georgia boy comes home from the New World. He seduces innocent Ruth and pretends to marry her, then runs off and abandons her, and she goes mad and runs into the woods and dies a tragic death. This is Romantic period now. This is exactly what you expect to happen. But what is fun is to read Bartram and then read Ruth, and all of a sudden you start recognizing where all this imagery is coming from. Bought from the Cherokees, military casque, helmet, girls, a happy rout with dance and shout, their pleasant Indian town to gather strawberries all day long, returning with a choral song when daylight is gone down, straight out of Bartram, where his encounter with the Cherokee maidens that they're watching from the bushes. Oh, it's wonderful. And then here's the magnolia spread high as overhead, the cypress and their spire, scarlet flowers gleam, cover 100 leagues and seem to set the hills on fire. This is straight out of his description of the azaleas in the Appalachians, absolutely straight from it. But ill he lived and much evil saw, and he receives the wild men's vices and gives them back his own, and his genius and moral frame is impaired, and he becomes the slave of low desires, and so forth. In other words, living on the rough frontier is damaging to the soul of the righteous man. To which my point is that if this is what the British think about the Americans, maybe we were better off without them. But it's fun to see the different take that Wordsworth gives on this thing. He views this wild, free life with the Indians with horror, really. This is degrading. It's not what a gentleman does. An interesting take on the things. It's fun to read this. Here's Thomas Jefferson. He's not a close friend of the Bartrams, but Jefferson and Madison and Washington and all are buying a good deal of their plant material from the Bartrams. And there is a correspondence between them. All of them at one time or the other come out. You'll recall the Continental Congress and everything was in Philadelphia. And all these people come out and visit the garden and so forth. And so, again, here's another one of these Peel paintings with Bartram right in amongst the founding fathers. This is one the curator at Bartram's Garden, a man named Joel Fry, who I'll show you his picture in a minute, sent me, and we discussed whether or not we were actually going to show this, and we decided that we would. This is supposed to be the Bartrams, all right, and this is, go back one. This is William, who is dressed, of course, as the French philosopher Rousseau. And then this is George Washington, dressed as he might have looked about 1760 or so, in his militia uniform with dark hair, and as a young man. They're the same age, almost exactly, all right? And here's everybody dressed in the height of French fashion, being served by a lady of color. Everybody's sort of vision of what gentleman's society must have been like in revolutionary times. All right, this was printed and run as part of a calendar by a Philadelphia newspaper about 1920. And while it's got all kinds of problems, including plants that didn't exist in North America at the time, and a Persian cat, which Joel said he will personally eat if anybody can prove that it was there in America by this point. But it shows the esteem with which people held the Bartrams. These are important folks. These are the folks who are adding to their gardens and making societal life worthwhile. So it's a powerful image, even though it's very wrong in detail. Bartram is really an important bird man. He can identify more than 215 species of birds without binoculars. This is a pre-binocular day, all right? Here's a black vulture, one of Bartram's little sketches. Bartram is never makes the big book of birds that might have made him famous, but he's a marvelous artist. And he is the teacher of Alexander Wilson. Wilson is the one who does paint the portfolio of birds, and therefore claims to be the father of American ornithology. And someone has pointed out that if Wilson is the father of American ornithology, then Bartram is the godfather. Okay, so again, this is another Bartram drawing of the Florida sandhill crane, which is the eastern subspecies which was described by Mr. Bartram. You know this is a Bartram painting because of the recognizable species of flowers and plants in the margins of the painting or the drawing. Here's Alexander Wilson himself, Scottish school teacher, very interested in birds. Bartram teaches him about birds and also teaches him and critiques his painting, so he improves the man's painting. He creates a portfolio called American Ornithology, so that's kind of a pun right there. He is a big influence on Audubon, who might have come up with the idea himself, but there's enough of a contact between this man, Wilson, and Audubon, who's slightly younger, that it's likely that Audubon gets this idea of painting the portfolio and then selling it by subscription to support the printing of it from Wilson. There is a meeting between these two in Cincinnati, and the only bona fide we have of it is from Audubon himself, who claims that when Wilson saw his painting, Wilson gathered up his stuff and left without a word. Maybe, okay, but it's a good story, what the heck. Here's Wilson's woodpecker plate. Would point out at this time that all the early drawings of birds are done from dead specimens, including that rather obviously dead sapsucker over there with its tail and mouth open and everything like that. And so this doesn't resolve itself until after the Civil War, when photography becomes available, because a bird just won't pose for you, no matter what you do. Another Wilson plate, including swallows, which are quite good, and a bunch of just sort of odds and ends birds, including a little screech owl, which looks kind of strange, but then again, little screech owls look kind of strange. So Wilson did quite a good piece of work, but he dies young. leaving the stage open for Audubon. There is a little watercolor sketch by Bartram. And the bird is noted mostly for the lifelike pose. And this is the work of a man who is so familiar with the birds. He's a naturalist first and artist second. And he's so familiar with the birds, he's able to sketch them in a lifelike pose. Bartram's a big fisherman. He's probably the first American European to catch a fish in Alabama on an artificial bait. The Indians teach him how to make flies with a hook and some feathers, and you dangle it on a pole by the stump, and they get them. And so he calls it fishing with a bob. Not a bobber, but a bob. So this thing is a bob. And there's that's early Bartram's work, and his alligators. All right, Bartram describes alligators, and he makes some wild and extravagant claims. And now I've been kind of sniffing around behind Bartram for about a dozen years, and as recently as the mid-90s, when I started kind of wondering what was going on here, there was sort of an urban legend floating around there that you couldn't trust Bartram because of his observations of the alligators were so bizarre that you couldn't trust anything else he said. And in fact, when we attended a meeting down in Florida, there were several papers specifically addressing this problem. And so one of the things he claims is that alligators blow smoke out of their nose. And another thing he claims is that when they grunt, the water surface dances. And he claims also that they cooperate, laying side by side, eating fish that running up and down the rivers. Well, that's obviously nonsense. And so even in Bartram's own life, he shuts up and refuses to discuss alligators. He will not talk about alligators with anybody. Old man's crazy. All right. Unfortunately, he's right. And there is a photograph of alligators cooperatively feeding. The creek is flowing this way, and here's the alligators lined up cheek to jowl with their mouths open, scarfing up the fish that are running up and down the little creek. And here's the guys ready for second setting. All right, there's alligators cooperatively feeding. And there's an alligator grunting in the water, and the water dancing, because it turns out that what is happening is that the alligators are, this isn't a vocalization, it's them vibrating their rib cage. I guess that noise is the alligator doing this. And in fact, the water does dance, and when they slam their mouth shut, the spray issues out of their nose and mouths, and I guess could be mistaken for smoke or something. So it turns out the old man's right, and which makes everybody feel a lot better about believing what he says, because in almost every case he may not be interpreting what he's seeing right, but his observations are correct. Here's one of his nicer watercolor sketches. Those of you who have ever seen a coach whip snake realize that it's tan or pale for most of its length, and the only pigmented part is the few inches at the front, which looks like the sweat-soaked handle of a braided bullwhip, and which is why they're called a whip snake. And this is the one that chases you down, wraps around your ankles, and lashes you to death with its tail. Yeah, okay. If you believe that one, I got a bridge I want to sell you too. But it does look like a whip. All right. And then here's the head of a rattlesnake. There's a couple of good rattlesnake stories in Bartram, and there is a hysterically funny story where he's working over here at Tuckabachie, and somebody comes to him saying, Puck Puggy, Puck Puggy. His Indian name is Puck Puggy, which means flower hunter. Puck Puggy, Puck Puggy. There's a rattlesnake in the camp. We're forbidden to kill rattlesnakes. You've got to come kill the rattlesnake. All right. And so he goes down. I don't want to get involved in this. Oh, yes. And so he goes down and he kills the rattlesnake, cuts off its head, and goes back to where he's working. In a few minutes, here's a deputation of people who have come to scratch him so that he bleeds, and so to bleed out some of the aggressive nature in him like this. And so there's this big argument over whether or not they're going to scratch him or not, and they finally forgive him. It's a wonderful story. But I am tempted to wonder if, in fact, this might not be the alligator, the rattlesnake. Somewhere in the early 70s, somebody gives him a painting lesson. We're not quite sure who it is. He's working with a map maker named Bram in Georgia. And somebody gives him a painting lesson because his stuff gets lots better real quick. And so this is one of his later paintings with the lovely marsh pink here, but he can't help himself. He's got to include something else there, a lovely big imperial moth. But even though he's talking about the painting, he is toying with the idea of doing a botany of America with a lot of pictures of plants and things, which never actually comes off. But a lot of these paintings and drawings you see were prepared for this botany of America. There's a lettered olive, a lovely pen and ink work for the little shell that lives on the Gulf Coast right now. A passion flower, but we all know it's really called a what? A maypop, right. There's a maypop. A typical of exacting later drawing by Billy. And then there's a pitcher plant. And this is one of the ones drawn for the botany. You see he's already lettered some of the details here. And so here's the purple pitcher plant that still lives in Alabama. But look here, he can't help himself. There's another species stuck in a corner. He's, oh, I got this big open spot here. Let me put ooh, look, a chicken. Right. And here's a bunch of Bartram scholars standing right there, including Catherine, who obviously doesn't like me and who ducked out. Eye appointment. At least that's what she says. And this is Tom Hallock, and this man and this lady, who is University of Pennsylvania, who I am blocking on at the moment, have discovered the original manuscript from which the 1791 edition was set. And there are corrections in the manuscript in two different hands, only one of which is Bartram's. And so we're waiting for them to publish for us to frantically look to see which of our passages has been added, probably by Mr. Johnson, the publisher, in order to sell the book. So we're really looking forward to this. There's a very active Bartram scholarship out there. Anybody who writes on science, travel, geography, and philosophy is bound to have people studying him, and they're still working on him even as we speak. The tall gentleman in the back is Joel Fry, the curator up at Bartram's Garden in Philadelphia, who is not nearly as frightening as he appears there, who's a marvelous guy, very knowledgeable botanist. And now it's time for your reading assignment. All right, you didn't think this is a university, you don't get out of this. All right, the book I want you to read is this, what is this one?
Oh, that's old.
Oh, that's a reproduction of okay, you can read that. All right, this is the one I want you to read. This is the one I want you to read. This is William Bartram, Naturalist edition by Francis Harper. The original book, where's that first volume? I put it down here. All right, this book is written for an 18th century scholar who is familiar with Latin and has certain conventions in it that make it very difficult to read, not the least of which is the names for plants that he uses are no longer valid, and you can't even look them up. What is he talking about? We don't know. All right, and so this is why it's very frustrating to read the original unless you're an expert like the judge here. All right, okay. What I want you to do is to get this book for about $10 off of Amazon, Naturalist edition by Francis Harper, because it's got the original text, then it's got a page-by-page commentary over where he is, what the date is, what he's seeing, what he's really talking about when he talks about something, and then it's got a large glossary so you can look up every word in the text and find out what it is. He's using 8 different terms for the same plant. Okay, so this is the one I want everybody to buy and read first. All right. If you have read that, then I will allow you to read Catherine Braun and Greg Wazelkoff Mobile's book on William Bartram and the Southeastern Indians, a lovely big book. And they have been through Harper here. They've pulled out all of the Indian connections, and they go through them one by one and say, all right, Harper, who publishes about 1950, they put 50 years of modern anthropological scholarship on them, bring all of them up to date, and you realize what an observer Bartram really was. And he sees things and talks about things that nobody else talks about. So by all means, if you're interested in Indians, this is your second book. If you have done your homework, I will allow you to read the American Library edition. The American Library edition is a very unhappy job. It's got tissue-thin paper, narrow margins, itty-bitty type. It's not pleasant to read. But it has other things in it by Bartram, including the 2 original reports to Fothergill, or 2 of the 3, one's missing. 2 of the 3 original reports to his sponsor in England, which is different than the text in Travels. So, and there's a few other minor things by him in there. But by all means, I want you to read Harper's Naturalist edition first. He remains an inspiration to other people. A very recent children's book about the Bartrams. It's about him and his father, about little Billy, who is a helping in the garden and who goes on the trip with his father and who sees the Indians and everything. Charming, very excellent, really, even for big folks, tells a lot of very good things. And so this is a brand new book, which I most highly recommend. Be a mighty nice Christmas or birthday present for a young'un. And there's the new book. This is the Bartram philosophy, as he expresses in his introduction, that this world is a glorious apartment of the boundless palace of the sovereign creator and is furnished with an infinite variety of animated scenes, inexpressibly beautiful and pleasing, equally free to the inspection and enjoyment of all of his creatures, which is a grand way to end up the thing. Thank you. Would you like me to turn this off, or you want to leave it running? Never mind. Here we go. I'd love to answer any questions. My microphone is dragging my pants down. I'm getting the sign here. At least I'm going to blame it on the microphone. All right. We can ask a few questions here, and then I will hang around at the reception and we can talk some more. Would anybody like to ask a question now?
I do.
Yes, sir.
I'm interested in the best authority on exactly where Bartram crossed the Chattahoochee and then wound his way down to Montgomery and on down to Mobile and into New Orleans.
Right.
Because I've got a place down there that's somewhere near. That's all that I know.
The best authority in that is Brad Sanders' book on, I think it's Following or Tracing William Bartram. It's a large format book. It's still in print. Fever Tree Press out of Georgia. And it's by Sanders. It's called Following William Bartram or Tracing William Bartram or something like that. It's brand new, and he has really done his homework and goes step by step through the Bartram journeys. Tells you where each one of them are in modern terms and everything. Question back there somewhere. Yes, sir.
On the one report to his patron that's missing, what segment of his travels did that cover?
It's the end part. It's the part after. I think the second one goes home from Mobile, and it's the one that describes a great deal of Alabama and his last year over in Georgia. I think is the one that's missing, and we just don't know where it is. We don't know if it ever actually got mailed to Fothergill or not. Yes, sir.
I had heard probably about 15 years ago that Ken Burns, the documentary producer, was interested in doing something on the Bartram Trail. Do you know if that's true or if that's an idea in development?
I don't know. I would be delighted if it were. he's really a fabulous character. He comes down here and, like Thoreau, sort of goes out to the woods and reinvents himself. He's tied in to the American founding fathers. He's tied in to the early emergence of botany as a science. He's, of course, tied into the Romantic poets. He's got all these connections, and somebody like Burns could really do a wonderful job with him. What a lot of us want to see is a retrospective exhibit of his paintings, which are mostly watercolor sketches, but they're really quite amazing, some of them. And some of them were done either in Alabama or from sketches and specimens from Alabama. Yes, sir.
Were his writings done on the trail, or did he go back to Savannah and do all this beautiful?
Most of the finished work is certainly done in Savannah. He's maddeningly vague about what he does on the trail, although here and there he says, I'm working on my collection. So he's apparently pressing specimens, he's keeping notes, he's keeping a travelogue of the thing, and he's making collections. The fangs from the rattlesnake, for instance, wind up in the collection and so forth. But he really doesn't say, well, this is what I wore, this is what I had. Very vague. We know he's got a white blanket. We know he's got a horse that he rides, one horse through almost all the journey that he finally has to sell. And then he obviously sneaks back to Philadelphia because he's afraid he's going to be arrested by somebody. And who he's going to be arrested by is the question. And everybody thinks he's got loyalist inclinations now, but here he is hanging out with all these important, excuse me, I said revolutionary connections, but here he is hanging out with all of these loyalists who are the people he has the letters of introduction to, which enabled him to travel. So he's in a bad pickle and he has to go home. Yes, sir.
What do we know about the party traveling with him? Their education, where they are?
They're just another one of the parties of traders. There's nothing special about them. He goes down there with them. They're probably, what's the important trader in Silver Hill, Georgia? What's the man's name? Galliot. He has connections with an important early businessman in Georgia, and this group of folks is probably some of this man's minions who he goes down with. He comes back in a smaller group and tells funny stories in one part, in fact, about crossing Luxpalala Creek over here in the dead of the winter, and how the other guy who's with him, the Indian guy who's with him, strips off all his clothes and swims across, and Bartram says, I'm afraid I had to keep my pants on for fear of what might be in the water or something like that. So it's a charming book. I've gone much longer than I normally go. I'm sorry. Let's go have something to eat, and I will answer any questions or hang around as long as you like. Oh.